They told us not to go north. Not under any circumstances. Not for curiosity. Not for survival. Not even if we heard someone calling our names from the trees. At the time, it sounded like the kind of warning adults give when they don't want to explain something complicated to kids who've already been through too much. But standing there now, at the edge of a forest that didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even sound alive, I realized it wasn't a warning meant to control us. It was a warning meant to protect us. And we didn't listen. If you've ever been handed a life you didn't ask for, a responsibility you didn't earn, then maybe you'll understand what it felt like the day my sister Lily and I walked out of the Ashwood State home with nothing but a duffel bag, a rusted key, and a sealed envelope with our names written in handwriting we didn't recognize. 18 years old, that's the magic number. The system calls it independence. What it really means is you're out of time. 1 minute you have a bed, a routine, 3 meals, and someone legally obligated to check if you're alive. The next, you're standing on a cracked sidewalk with a social worker shaking your hand like you're a coworker leaving for a better job. Good luck, Ethan, she said, already turning back toward the building before I could answer. Lily stood beside me, gripping her backpack straps so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was 16, 2 years away from aging out herself, but because we had no one else, they released her into my custody. We're really leaving? She asked quietly. I nodded, even though I didn't feel ready. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Inside was a letter from a lawyer in a place called Blackridge, Montana, informing us that our grandfather, someone we barely remembered, had passed away and left us his entire estate. Estate sounded like money, like opportunity, like something out of the kind of stories we used to tell each other when the lights went out and we needed something better to believe in. But when we got on that bus, rode 12 hours through empty highways and fading towns, and finally walked into that small, dim law office above a feed store, the truth was a lot less impressive. 120 acres, the lawyer said, sliding a map across the desk. Mostly forest. Some open land. There's a farmhouse, though it hasn't been maintained in years. I stared at the map, tried to make sense of it. That's it? I asked. He adjusted his glasses, studying us carefully. There's also a small trust. Enough to cover basic living expenses for about a year, maybe less if you're not careful. Lily leaned closer to me, whispering, So, we're not rich. I shook my head slowly. No, we're landowners. The word felt strange in my mouth, like something that belonged to someone else. The lawyer hesitated, then reached into his drawer and pulled out a small ring of keys. They were old, worn, heavy in a way that suggested they opened more than just doors. He placed them on the desk, but didn't let go right away. There's something else, he said. His voice had changed, lost that professional distance. Your grandfather left a note, specifically for you. He slid a folded piece of paper toward me. The handwriting was rough, uneven, like it had been written in a hurry or with a shaking hand. I opened it slowly, Lily leaning in beside me. It was only one sentence. Stay on the south side of the property. Do not go north, no matter what you hear. I blinked, reading it again, hoping it would make more sense the second time. It didn't. What does that mean? Lily asked. The lawyer finally released the keys, leaning back in his chair. Your grandfather was a private man, kept to himself. Some folks in town thought he was eccentric. Eccentric how? I pressed. He gave a small, tight smile. Let's just say he had his reasons for staying where he was. That was it. No explanation, no reassurance. Just a warning that felt heavier than the land itself. The drive out to the property took nearly an hour. The paved road turned to gravel, the gravel to dirt, and eventually even that faded into 2 tire tracks cutting through dense forest. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. The kind that feels like something is listening. When we finally reached the gate, it was rusted but intact, a thick chain wrapped around it. I used one of the keys, the lock protesting before it finally clicked open. Lily stepped out of the car, looking around slowly. It's big, she said. Yeah, I replied, though big wasn't the word I would have chosen. Isolated felt more accurate. We drove another 10 minutes before the trees opened up just enough to reveal the farmhouse. It leaned slightly to one side, like it had grown tired of standing. The paint was peeling, the windows clouded with dust, but it was still there. Still solid. Still ours. I cut the engine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then Lily pointed. Ethan, look. I followed her gaze. About 50 yards from the house, a line had been carved into the land. Not a fence, not a wall, just a series of old wooden posts, each marked with faded red paint. They stretched across the property, disappearing into the trees on either side. That's the south boundary, I said, more to convince myself than her. She nodded slowly. So, north is on the other side of that. Yeah. We stood there for a long moment, staring at the tree line beyond the posts. It looked different. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and explain, but enough that you noticed it without trying. The trees were closer together, darker, like the light didn't reach them the same way. Lily shivered, even though it wasn't cold. We're not going over there, right? She asked. I looked back at the house, at the keys still in my hand, at the life we were supposed to build out here with nothing but each other and whatever this place was hiding. No, I said finally. We're not. But that night, lying in a house that creaked with every shift of the wind, surrounded by a silence that felt too complete, I heard something. Faint, distant, coming from the north side of the property. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. A voice, calling my name. And the worst part wasn't that it sounded human. It was that it sounded familiar. The voice didn't stop after that first night. It came back, softer at first, like something testing the distance between us, learning how close it could get without being noticed, and by the third night, it wasn't just calling my name anymore. It was calling Lily's too. And that's when I knew this wasn't something I could ignore or explain away as the wind or stress or imagination, because Lily heard it as well, sitting straight up in the narrow bed across from mine, her eyes wide in the dark as. She whispered, Ethan, that's you, right? And I told her no, even though a part of me wanted to lie, wanted to say yes just to make it less real. But the truth hung between us heavier than anything we'd carried out of that orphanage, and neither of us slept after that. Just lay there listening as the voice faded back into the trees beyond the red-marked boundary, like it had never been there at all. The next morning, I tried to act like things were normal, like this was just another adjustment. Another strange place we'd have to survive. But Lily wasn't the kind of person you could fool with half-truths. She followed me outside, standing beside me as I stared at the line of posts cutting across the land, their red paint chipped and faded, but still visible enough to feel intentional, like a warning someone had refreshed over and over again. You heard it too, she said, not a question, and I nodded, my eyes still on the northern tree line. Yeah, I admit it, and she crossed her arms, tightly, like she was holding herself together. Then we should leave, she said, simple and direct, the way she always was when things got too complicated. We don't have to stay here, Ethan. We can go back, or go somewhere else, anywhere but here. And I wanted to agree. I really did. Because leaving would have been the easy choice, the safe one. But the truth was we didn't have anywhere else to go, no backup plan, no safety net, just this land and whatever secrets it was holding. We'll figure it out, I told her instead, though I wasn't sure what it even was yet. And that's when I decided we needed answers. Not guesses, not fear, but something real we could hold on to. The farmhouse didn't look like much from the outside, but inside it was different, not abandoned like I'd expected, just paused, like someone had stepped out for a moment and never came back. Everything in its place, tools neatly arranged on the walls, books stacked carefully on a small shelf, a kitchen that still smelled faintly of old wood, and something earthy, like dried herbs. And it didn't take long to realize our grandfather had been more organized than anyone we'd ever known, because everywhere we looked, there were signs of intention. Labels on drawers, markings carved into beams. Even the floorboards in certain spots looked like they'd been lifted and replaced more than once. And it was Lily who found the first real clue, kneeling near the fireplace, running her fingers along the edge of a stone that didn't quite match the others. This one's loose, she said. And when I pried it out, revealing a small hollow space behind it, I felt something shift inside me, that same feeling you get when a story you've been told your whole life suddenly starts to unravel. Inside the space was a metal box, cold and heavy, and the key that opened it was already on the ring we'd been given, like our grandfather had known exactly when we'd find it, and exactly what we'd need to understand what he'd left behind. But there was no money inside, no deeds or anything that looked like a typical inheritance. Just stacks of papers, journals filled with tight, precise handwriting, and a series of maps that all marked the same thing. The boundary line between the south and north sections of the property, drawn over and over again with increasing detail, as if he'd been studying it for years. And maybe he had. We spent the rest of the day reading, sitting at the old wooden table as sunlight filtered weakly through the dusty windows, and what we found didn't make things easier. It made them worse, because the journals weren't about farming or land management or anything practical. They were records, observations, written by someone who wasn't just living on the land but watching it, documenting patterns, changes, things that didn't belong, and the entries started normal enough. Notes about weather, soil conditions, animal tracks. But then they shifted, slowly at first, then all at once, into something else entirely. Mentions of sounds coming from the north side at night. Descriptions of shapes moving between trees that didn't match any known animal. And then the entries that made Lily stop reading altogether, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed the journal toward me. "You read this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and when I did, I understood why, because the words weren't just observations anymore. They were warnings, written with a kind of urgency that felt almost desperate. "It mimics," one entry read, the ink pressed so hard into the page it nearly tore through. "Not perfectly. Not at first. But it learns. It listens. It repeats what it hears until it gets it right." And below that, another line, written later, the handwriting shakier, less controlled. "Do not respond. Do not answer. It needs permission." And I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room, because suddenly the voice we'd heard didn't feel random anymore. Didn't feel like something calling out blindly in the dark. It felt intentional, targeted, like it knew exactly who we were and what we sounded like, and Lily must have been thinking the same thing, because she looked at me with an expression I'd only seen once before, the day we were separated in foster care for a year. That same mix of fear and determination. "It sounded like you," she said quietly, "but it wasn't you." And I nodded, unable to argue with that, because deep down I'd known it the moment I heard it. There had been something off about the way it said my name, like the tone was right, but the feeling behind it wasn't, like a recording played just slightly out of sync. And that's when we heard it again, not from the distance this time, but closer, much closer, just beyond the line of red-marked posts, a voice drifting through the trees, clearer than before, more confident, calling out in a tone that was almost perfect, almost human. "Ethan, Lily." And this time, it didn't fade away right after. It lingered, waiting, like it expected an answer. It didn't leave this time. And that was the first thing that broke whatever sense of control I thought I still had. Because up until that moment the voice had always retreated, always slipped back into the trees like it was testing us from a distance. But now it stayed just beyond the red-marked boundary, repeating our names in a tone that was almost perfect, almost human, just enough to make your instincts argue with your fear. And I could feel Lily shift beside me, not stepping forward but not backing away either, caught in that dangerous space between curiosity and survival. "It's closer," she whispered, and I grabbed her wrist before she could take another step, my grip tighter than I meant it to be. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I'd ever used with her, because something in the journals, something in the way our grandfather had written those warnings, was screaming in my head. "Do not respond. Do not answer. It needs permission." And for a moment, everything went completely still, the voice stopping as if it were listening, waiting for us to break first. And then it spoke again, softer this time, different. And my stomach dropped because it wasn't calling my name anymore. It was calling hers in my voice, perfectly, exactly the way I would say it. "Lily, it's okay." And I felt her freeze, her breath catching, and I tightened my grip, pulling her back a step. "That's not me," I said quickly, low and firm. "Don't listen to it." But I could see the conflict in her face. Because it sounded right, it sounded safe, it sounded like something she trusted her whole life, and that's what made it dangerous. We backed away slowly, step by step, not turning our backs on the tree line until we reached the farmhouse. And only when the door slammed shut behind us did the voice finally stop, cutting off so abruptly it was worse than if it had faded out, like it had simply decided it didn't need to try anymore. Not yet. And for the rest of that night we didn't speak much. Just sat at the table with the journal spread out between us, rereading entries we'd already gone through. searching for something we'd missed, something that could explain what this thing was or how to stop it. But the more we read, the clearer it became that our grandfather hadn't been trying to stop it. He'd been trying to contain it, to keep it on the other side of that boundary, no matter what it cost him. And that's when I found the final set of pages, tucked into the back of one of the journals, separate from the others like he'd added them later. The handwriting rougher, rushed, like he'd been running out of time, and the words hit harder than anything else we'd read. "It is not the forest," he wrote. "The trees are just where it learned to hide. It is below. It always has been." And beneath that, a crude map of the northern section, marked with X's and lines that led to something labeled only as Old Access. And I knew immediately what it meant even before I said it out loud. "Tunnels," I muttered, and Lily looked at me, confused at first, then slowly understanding as I pointed to the map. Something was built out there. Something they tried to reach or keep buried. And she shook her head, her voice barely steady. "Then why didn't he just leave? Why stay here alone?" And I didn't answer right away, because I already knew, the same way you know something you don't want to admit is true. "Because if you left," I said finally, "no one would have been here to keep it from getting out." And the silence that followed felt heavier than anything we'd faced so far, because that meant the responsibility he'd carried his entire life hadn't disappeared when he died. It had been passed on to us, whether we wanted it or not. The next morning, we didn't, because if something was already trying to cross the boundary, then whatever was keeping it there was failing, and ignoring it wasn't going to fix that. "We go together," Lily said, her voice steady in a way that made her sound older than 16. And I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her to stay behind where it was safer, but there wasn't a safe place anymore. Not really. So I just nodded, grabbing the keys, the map, and one of the old flashlights we'd found in the house, and we walked out, toward the red-marked posts, the line that separated what we knew from what we didn't. And for a moment we both hesitated, standing there with the wind moving softly through the southern trees while the northern forest remained completely still, like it was waiting, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. And then we stepped across. The difference was immediate, subtle but undeniable. The air heavier, the light dimmer even though the sky above hadn't changed, and the deeper we went, the more the forest shifted around us, trees growing closer together, their trunks twisting in ways that didn't look natural, like they'd been pulled towards something beneath the ground. And after about 10 minutes of walking, we found it. A collapsed structure half hidden under roots and soil, the remains of something man-made that had been there long before our grandfather ever set foot on this land. And as we cleared away enough debris to reveal the entrance, a cold draft pushed up from below, carrying with it that same faint, familiar sound. Not a voice this time, but something deeper, something layered, like multiple voices trying to speak at once and failing. And Lily grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, and she was right. Every instinct I had told me to turn around, to go back, to forget all of this and take whatever money we could get for the land and run. But then the sound changed again, shifting into something clearer, something almost recognizable. And this time it wasn't calling our names. It was speaking in a voice that sounded like our grandfather's, rough and low and impossibly real. "Don't let it out," it said. And I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Because that wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And yet there it was, coming from somewhere beneath our feet. And that's when I understood the final piece of the warning. The part he hadn't written down because maybe he couldn't. Maybe he knew we wouldn't believe it until we heard it ourselves. This thing didn't just mimic voices. It learned them, stored them, used them when it needed to. And if it could sound like him now, then it meant it had been listening for a long time, longer than we could even imagine. And as the ground beneath us gave a low, almost imperceptible shift, like something moving far below the surface, I realized with a clarity that cut through every doubt I had left that this wasn't something waiting to escape. This was something waiting for us to make a mistake, waiting for us to open a door that had been closed for decades. And standing there at the edge of that buried entrance, with Lily's hand gripping mine and the sound of a borrowed voice echoing up from the darkness, I knew one thing for certain. If we didn't stop it here, if we didn't finish what our grandfather had started, then whatever was beneath this land wasn't going to stay buried much longer.